So we've talked about what makes some democratic institutions, things like what if you have parliamentarism versus presidentialism, a federal or a unitary form of a state, and we said that not all democracies look the same. The same is going to be true of another type of state that we'll encounter, and that's called authoritarian regimes or non-democracies. As a matter of fact, there's actually a variety of different non-democracies too. It's easy to kind of think that all non-democracies look the same, right? You've got some angry-looking dictator who is in charge of the world, and of course he wears his funny pointy hat. And that's what makes a dictatorship, right? Hi. But actually, just like there are lots of different kinds of democracies, there's also lots of kinds of non-democracies. And so one of the things that you'll see is we need to know about some of those institutions. So that's what we're going to spend some time in here in this mini lecture. So what is a non-democratic regime? Well, it's going to be some kind of state, it's going to be some kind of regime controlled by a small group or an individual who exercises power over the state without being constitutionally responsible to the public. In other words, there's going to be a dividing line between a leader or leaders and the people at large. Now, even in non-democracies, people can sometimes bridge the gap a little bit and exert pressure or overthrow leaders. But what makes them unique is the fact that these walls are purposefully here. In a democracy, we have different ways of channeling popular participation, but we don't purposely block it. So there are two major types of non-democracies, and the first that we're going to take a look at are called authoritarian systems, and they have an array of different systems, but they're all different ways where government, right, the officials who are in charge, are not responsible to the public, right, the people. And so the public will have a limited or no potentially role at all in selecting those leaders. And so in these kinds of systems, we'll generally see that individual freedom is restricted. In an authoritarian system, they're not really worried about everything the public is doing. The primary plan is for the government to remain in power. Now, this is in contrast with another form of non-democracy that you'll see when we talk in comparative government. And we call this totalitarianism. See, in a totalitarian system, it's kind of like authoritarianism plus. And in this sense, a totalitarian regime, they don't just want to be in control. They want to use that control to transform all aspects of their country, specifically the state, society, and economy. They're worried about the total person. They're worried about the totality of society, and therefore it's totalitarianism. And so they'll use violence as a tool to create institutions. And there's generally going to be a strong ideological goal involved in what they do. So for instance, in a totalitarian regime, if I'm in Iran, which is an example of one of these, I'm not just interested in maintaining control. I'm also interested in making sure that all of my people follow my very specific ideological points of view. That's a totalitarian regime. Now, behind the curtains, just like there were with states, democratic states, there's lots of different forms or models of democracies and non-democracies. And really, there are 5 big versions. You can have personal rule, where one person is in charge. You can have military rule, where the military takes control of the civilian apparatus. You can have one-party rule, like in China, where a single party controls everything about the state. You can have a theocracy, where people speaking on behalf of God, or theoretically on the behalf of God, rule, so kind of rule by religious leaders. And you can have illiberal regimes. They will have some of the elements of democracy, but they won't really practice it. They'll oftentimes be a person behind the throne. As a matter of fact, in some ways you might argue that Russia under Putin is a country like this. So, but just in a quick overview, these are kind of the basics of non-democracies. They are going to be as varied as democracies, and they can fall as either an authoritarian or as a totalitarian, and there's different institutions that we'll see taking place inside of their states.